My name is Janet. I am 32 years old, and what I discovered in my own home shattered everything I believed about the people I love. Everything I thought was real turned out to be a carefully constructed lie, and the person I trusted most in this world became the architect of my deepest pain. I'm recording this because I need someone to know what happened. I need someone to understand that the nightmare I lived through wasn't just in my head, that the betrayal I experienced was real, and that the choices I made, no matter how impossible they seemed, were the only way I could survive. But what I saw that night, I'll never forget it. The image is burned into my mind like a scar that refuses to heal. And before I continue, before I take you into the darkness that consumed my life for over a year, please like this video. Subscribe to Voices with Auntie Mimi and tell me where you're watching from. It helps me know someone out there still believes in stories like this. It helps me know I'm not alone in this vast, indifferent world. Because for the longest time, I felt completely and utterly alone, abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love me, carrying a secret so heavy it nearly crushed me. Let me take you back to when everything was still beautiful, when my life felt like a blessing I didn't deserve. 2 years ago, I was married to Daniel. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 5 of those. We lived in a modest but comfortable home in the suburbs, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Every morning, I'd wake up before him, make coffee the way he liked it, strong with just a touch of cream, and we'd sit together on our back porch watching the sun come up over the neighborhood. Those quiet moments felt sacred to me. He'd hold my hand, stroke my fingers with his thumb, and tell me about his plans for the day. I worked as a dental hygienist at a practice downtown, and he managed a small construction company his father had started. Our life had a rhythm, a pattern that felt safe and predictable. Sunday mornings we'd go to the farmer's market together, picking out fresh vegetables and flowers for the kitchen table. Wednesday nights were our date nights. Nothing elaborate, usually just dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant or a movie at the old theater on Main Street. Fridays, we'd have his parents over for dinner, and I'd cook his mother's recipes while she sat at the kitchen counter, telling me stories about Daniel as a boy. His father would sit in the living room with Daniel, talking about work and sports and all the things fathers and sons discuss. I loved my life. I loved our routines. I loved the way Daniel would come up behind me while I was cooking and wrap his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. I loved how he'd leave little notes for me around the house, on the bathroom mirror, tucked into my purse, stuck to the coffee maker. "You're my everything," they'd say, or "Can't wait to see you tonight." Simple words that made me feel cherished, wanted, loved beyond measure. We'd been trying to have a baby for about a year, not desperately, not with the kind of clinical precision some couples employ, but hopefully, expectantly. We'd talk about names, about whether we wanted to find out the gender or be surprised, about how we'd convert the spare bedroom into a nursery. Daniel would sometimes put his hand on my stomach, even though I wasn't pregnant yet, and say, "One day soon, our little one will be in there." And I'd smile because I believed him. I believed in us. I believed in our future together. But soon I started noticing small things that didn't make sense, little fractures in the perfect picture I'd painted of our marriage. They were so subtle at first that I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that I was looking for problems where none existed. But deep down, in that place where instinct lives and truth whispers, I knew something had changed. It started with his phone. Daniel had never been secretive about his phone before. It would sit on the kitchen counter while he showered, on the nightstand while he slept, face up and unlocked. I'd never felt the need to look through it because I trusted him completely, blindly, foolishly. But about 4 months before everything fell apart, he started taking it everywhere. To the bathroom, to the garage when he went to get something from the car. He'd sleep with it under his pillow or on his side of the bed, always face down now, always just out of reach. When I'd ask him something simple, "Who was that texting you?" he'd get defensive in a way he never had before. "Just work stuff," he'd say, his voice tight and irritated. "Why are you asking?" And then he'd make me feel like I was the problem, like my simple question was an accusation, like my curiosity was a sign of some deep insecurity within me, rather than a response to his obvious secrecy. He stopped smiling at me the way he used to. You know that smile? The one that reaches the eyes, that carries genuine warmth and affection? That disappeared. When he looked at me now, there was something hollow in his gaze, something distant and unreachable. It was like he was looking through me rather than at me, like I'd become invisible or inconsequential. The morning coffee ritual ended. He started leaving for work earlier, coming home later. Those Wednesday date nights became less frequent. "I'm too tired," he'd say, or "I've got an early morning tomorrow." The notes stopped appearing around the house. The casual touches, the spontaneous kisses, the little gestures of affection that had made me feel loved. They all evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. His mother noticed, too. One Friday evening when they came for dinner, she pulled me aside in the kitchen while I was preparing dessert. "Is everything okay with you two?" she asked, her voice gentle but concerned. "Daniel seems different lately, distracted." I forced a smile and lied through my teeth. "We're fine," I said, "just stressed with work." But I could see in her eyes that she didn't quite believe me, and I didn't quite believe myself either. The worst part was how he started finding fault with everything I did. The house wasn't clean enough. Dinner wasn't ready on time. I was too tired, too emotional, too needy. Every conversation became a minefield. Every interaction an opportunity for him to express his disappointment in me. I started walking on eggshells in my own home, carefully measuring my words, monitoring my tone, trying desperately to become whatever version of myself he seemed to want. But nothing I did was right. Nothing I did was enough. And then there was her. I didn't know about her yet, didn't have a name or a face to attach to the growing distance between Daniel and me, but I sensed her presence like a ghost haunting our marriage. There were signs, the smell of perfume on his collar that wasn't mine, receipts for restaurants we'd never been to together, a sudden interest in his appearance that seemed disconnected from anything happening in our life. He started going to the gym more, buying new clothes, styling his hair differently. When I'd compliment him, trying to bridge the gap between us, he'd shrug it off like my opinion didn't matter anymore. One night, around 3 a.m, I woke up and reached for him, but his side of the bed was empty. I found him in the living room, sitting in the dark with his phone, the blue light illuminating his face. He was smiling at the screen, the kind of smile he used to give me, and when he heard me approach, he quickly locked the phone and turned it face down on his lap. "Can't sleep," he said, his voice defensive before I'd even asked a question. "Just looking at work emails." But it was 3 a.m, and no one smiles at work emails like that. Until one night, I saw something that made my heart stop. It was a Thursday evening in late September. I'd gotten off work early and decided to surprise Daniel with his favorite meal: pot roast with roasted vegetables, the recipe his mother had taught me when we first got married. I stopped by the grocery store, picked up everything I needed, and drove home feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. Maybe this would be the thing that brought us back together, I thought. Maybe a simple gesture of love and effort would remind him of what we had, of why we'd chosen each other in the first place. When I pulled into our driveway, I saw his truck was already there, which surprised me because he usually didn't get home until after 6. For a brief, stupid moment, my heart lifted. Maybe he'd come home early too. Maybe we were on the same wavelength, both trying to reconnect, both wanting to fix whatever had broken between us. I grabbed the grocery bags from the trunk and headed toward the front door, fumbling with my keys. That's when I heard it, laughter coming from inside the house. Daniel's laughter, rich and genuine and unguarded in a way I hadn't heard in months. And then another laugh, higher pitched, feminine, unfamiliar. My hands started shaking so badly I dropped my keys. I picked them up, my heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, and I unlocked the door as quietly as I could. The laughter was coming from upstairs, from our bedroom. I set the grocery bags down in the entryway, my movements mechanical and disconnected, like I was watching myself from outside my own body. I climbed the stairs, each step feeling like it took an eternity, my mind racing with explanations that could make this innocent, that could make this okay. Maybe it was his sister visiting unexpectedly. Maybe it was a coworker who'd stopped by to drop something off. Maybe. But I knew. Even before I reached the top of the stairs, even before I heard the sounds that no wife should ever have to hear coming from her own bedroom, I knew. The truth settled over me like ice water, cold and shocking and undeniable. I stood outside our bedroom door, frozen, unable to move forward or backward, trapped in a moment that would divide my life into before and after. Part of me wanted to burst through that door, to confront them, to scream and rage and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that was already breaking, already grieving, couldn't do it. I couldn't face the reality that waited on the other side of that door, because facing it would make it real, and making it real would destroy me. So I stood there, listening to my husband with another woman in the bed we shared, and something inside me simply shut down. It was like a circuit breaker flipping, a protective mechanism to keep me from completely falling apart right there in my own hallway. I turned around, walked back downstairs on legs that didn't feel like my own, picked up those stupid grocery bags and walked back out to my car. I drove, I don't remember where. I just drove for hours until the sun started setting and my gas tank was nearly empty, and I realized I had nowhere to go. I couldn't go home. That wasn't home anymore. I couldn't go to my parents. They'd moved to Arizona 2 years earlier. And besides, the shame of admitting that my marriage was falling apart felt unbearable. I couldn't go to my friends. Most of them were our friends, couple friends, and I didn't know whose side they'd take or what they'd think of me. So I went to a hotel, a cheap roadside place off the highway, and I checked in under my own name, using cash from the emergency fund I kept in my purse. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner, and the bedspread had stains I didn't want to think about, but I didn't care. I sat on the edge of that bed in the dark, still wearing my dental hygienist scrubs, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back for months. The pain came in waves, crashing over me again and again until I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but sob into a pillow that smelled like strangers. My phone rang incessantly, Daniel calling, texting, wondering where I was. "Where are you? I'm worried," his messages said, as if he had any right to be worried, as if he hadn't just destroyed our entire life together. I turned off my phone and lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how I'd missed the signs, how I'd been so blind, so stupid, so trusting. But you know what the worst part was? Even then, even knowing what I knew, part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation. Part of me wanted to go back home and have him tell me I'd misunderstood, that it wasn't what it looked like, that our marriage could still be saved. That's how deep denial can go. That's how powerful the desire to preserve what we love can be, even when what we love has already turned to ash. I stayed in that hotel room for 2 days. I called in sick to work, ignored every call and text from Daniel, and tried to figure out what to do next. The practical part of my brain kept making lists. Find a lawyer, open a separate bank account, document everything. But the emotional part just wanted to disappear to somehow unmake the reality I was now living in. On the third day, I finally went home. Not because I'd forgiven him or because I wanted to try to work things out, but because I needed answers. I needed to hear him say it, to look him in the eyes and have him admit what he'd done. I needed to stop living in the horrible limbo of knowing but not knowing, of understanding but not wanting to understand. Daniel was waiting for me when I walked through the door. He looked terrible, unshaven, red-eyed, still wearing the same clothes from 2 days earlier. "Sarah, thank God," he said, moving toward me like he was going to embrace me. I held up my hand to stop him, and he froze. "Where have you been? I've been going crazy. I thought something happened to you." "Who is she?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. I'd been expecting to cry, to yell, to fall apart, but instead I just felt numb, cold, empty. His face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me, Daniel. Not now, not anymore. I came home Thursday. I heard you, both of you, in our bedroom." My voice cracked on those last 2 words, and I had to pause to collect myself. "So don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about." He stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water, and I watched him calculate whether to keep lying or to finally tell the truth. I could see the moment he decided. His shoulders dropped, his eyes filled with tears, and he said the words that confirmed what I already knew, but had been desperately hoping wasn't true. "Her name is Jessica. She works at the company. We've been seeing each other for about 6 months. 6 months, half a year. All those nights he'd come home late. All those Wednesdays he'd been too tired for date night. All those mornings he'd left early. 6 months of lies and betrayal, while I'd been faithfully waiting at home, loving him, trusting him, planning our future together." "Do you love her?" I asked, and I don't know why that was the question that came out, but it was. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. "I don't know," he finally said. "It's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated, and then I laughed, this horrible, bitter sound that didn't even sound like me. "Our marriage is complicated now. That's what you're telling me." "Sarah, please let me explain." "Explain what, Daniel? Explain how you accidentally fell into bed with another woman? Explain how you accidentally did it over and over for 6 months? Explain how you looked me in the eyes every single day and lied to me?" My voice was rising now, all that numbness burning away into pure, white-hot rage. What could you possibly explain that would make any of this okay? And here's where it gets even worse. Here's where the knife that was already buried in my heart twisted. Daniel looked at me with something like pity in his eyes and said, "I want a divorce. Not, 'I'm sorry.' Not, 'I made a terrible mistake.' Not, 'Please forgive me, let me make this right.' He wanted a divorce. He'd been cheating on me for half a year, and now he wanted out so he could be with her without the inconvenience of having a wife. I thought it was over then, but I was wrong. Because 2 weeks later, after I'd moved out of our house and into a small apartment across town, after I'd filed for divorce and started trying to piece together some semblance of a life from the ruins of my marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. I was late. At first, I didn't think much of it. Stress can do strange things to a woman's body, and I was under more stress than I'd ever experienced in my life. I was barely eating, barely sleeping, going through the motions of work and life like a zombie. But when 3 weeks passed and nothing happened, I bought a test. Actually, I bought 5 tests because I couldn't believe the first one, or the second, or the third. But they all said the same thing: pregnant. I was carrying Daniel's child, the baby we'd tried for, the baby I'd wanted so desperately when I still believed in us, when I still thought we had a future together, and now here it was. This little cluster of cells growing inside me, a permanent connection to a man who'd betrayed me, who'd thrown away our marriage for a woman he'd known for 6 months. I sat on the bathroom floor of my tiny apartment and cried until I had no tears left. Part of me wanted to call Daniel immediately, to tell him, to somehow use this news to bring him back, to make him see what he was throwing away. But a larger part of me, the part that was angry and hurt and proud, refused. He'd made his choice. He wanted Jessica. He wanted the divorce. He didn't get to know about this baby, didn't get to have any claim to this one good thing that had come from our shattered marriage. I made a decision that night, sitting on that cold bathroom floor, with a positive pregnancy test clutched in my shaking hands. I decided I wouldn't tell anyone, not Daniel, not my parents in Arizona, not my friends, not my coworkers. This baby would be mine and mine alone. I would carry this secret as I carried this child, and I would do it completely on my own. Looking back now, I can see how irrational that decision was, how it was born from pain and anger and a desperate need to maintain some control over my life when everything had spiraled so completely out of control. But in that moment, it felt like the only choice I could make, the only way to protect myself and my baby from more hurt, more betrayal, more disappointment. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Daniel wanted the house, wanted half of everything I'd saved, wanted to nickel and dime me on every single asset we'd accumulated together. His lawyer was aggressive, painting me as an unstable woman who'd abandoned her marriage, who disappeared for days without explanation, who was clearly too emotional and unreliable to be reasonable. My lawyer fought back, but I could tell she was frustrated with me. "You need to tell the judge about the affair," she kept saying. "You need to let me present evidence of his infidelity. It will help your case." But I didn't want to air our dirty laundry in court. I didn't want to be the spurned wife seeking revenge. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to be free of Daniel and free to start my new life, my secret life, carrying this baby that no one else knew about. I started wearing looser clothes to work. I scheduled my prenatal appointments for early morning before my shift started, and I paid for everything in cash so there'd be no insurance records for Daniel to potentially discover during the asset division. I told my dentist boss I had a medical condition that required regular monitoring but that it was private, and I'd prefer not to discuss it. She was understanding, thankfully, and didn't push. The pregnancy was hard, not physically. Actually, I had an easy pregnancy as far as such things go. No morning sickness, no complications, no major discomforts beyond the usual. But emotionally, it was torture. Every milestone, hearing the heartbeat, finding out I was having a girl, feeling her first kicks, should have been shared with someone, celebrated with someone, cherished with someone. Instead, I experienced them alone, in doctors' offices with nurses who didn't know my story, in my apartment where no one could see me crying from joy and grief in equal measure. My daughter. I was having a daughter. And she would never know her father because I'd chosen to keep her a secret from him, because I couldn't bear the thought of sharing her with the man who destroyed me, because I was angry and hurt and making decisions that would affect her entire life based on my own pain. I told myself I was protecting her. I told myself that a father who'd cheated and lied and abandoned his marriage wasn't a father worth having. I told myself that we'd be better off without him, that she and I would create our own little family, our own little world, and we wouldn't need anyone else. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was being selfish. I was letting my hurt dictate choices that weren't just about me anymore. But I couldn't stop. I'd gone too far down this path, and admitting what I was doing, changing course, telling the truth, it all felt impossible now. The divorce was finalized when I was 6 months pregnant. I was showing clearly by then, but I'd been avoiding everyone from my old life so successfully that no one noticed. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office, wearing a loose dress and a jacket even though it was summer, and when it was done, when the judge had signed off and Daniel and I were officially no longer married, I felt nothing. No relief, no sadness, no anger, just emptiness. Daniel kept the house. I got a small settlement and my car. The material division of 7 years of marriage fit on 3 pages of legal paperwork. He moved Jessica in a week after the divorce was final. I heard about it through mutual friends who'd sided with him, who thought I'd been unreasonable and difficult during the proceedings. They didn't know about the affair. Daniel had apparently painted himself as the victim of a wife who'd suddenly become unstable and jealous for no reason. And I'd let him, because correcting the record would have meant engaging with him, thinking about him, giving him space in my head that I needed for my daughter. The 7th month of my pregnancy was when things got really difficult. I'd been so focused on keeping my secret, on maintaining the charade of a normal life, that I hadn't adequately prepared for the reality of having a baby. I had no crib, no clothes, no diapers, no plan for childcare after she was born. I'd been living in complete denial about what was coming, as if refusing to prepare would somehow make it less real, less overwhelming. I started shopping at thrift stores and garage sales, buying secondhand baby items and hiding them in my apartment like some kind of nesting squirrel preparing for winter. Every purchase felt both exciting and terrifying. A tiny onesie covered in ducks, a portable crib, a changing table. These physical manifestations of my daughter's impending arrival made everything suddenly, viscerally real in a way the pregnancy itself hadn't. I hadn't made friends in my new apartment complex. I kept to myself, came and went at odd hours to avoid my neighbors, and maintained the isolation I'd wrapped around myself like armor. But one evening, when I was struggling to carry a boxed car seat up the stairs to my second-floor apartment, a woman's voice called out behind me, "Here, let me help you with that." I turned to see a woman about my age, maybe a little older, with kind eyes and a warm smile. Before I could protest, she'd grabbed one end of the box. "I'm Rachel," she said as we maneuvered the box up the stairs. "I live in 2C. I've seen you around, but we've never officially met." "Sarah," I said, keeping my responses short, not wanting to encourage conversation. But when we reached my door and she helped me get the box inside, she saw my apartment, the pile of baby items in the corner, the obvious emptiness of a place that didn't feel like a home, the stark loneliness of my existence written all over the bare walls and unpacked boxes. "When are you due?" she asked gently. 2 months, I admitted, because there was no point in hiding it from her now. "And your husband? Partner?" "Divorced," I said, the words still tasting bitter on my tongue. "It's just me." Rachel didn't pry. She didn't ask questions or offer platitudes or make me feel pathetic. She just nodded and said, "Well, if you need anything, and I mean anything, I'm right down the hall. I have 3 kids of my own, so I've got extra baby stuff coming out of my ears if you need it." After she left, I sat in my apartment surrounded by my secondhand baby items and cried again, because that simple offer of kindness had cracked something in the protective shell I'd built around myself. For the first time in months, I felt the full weight of what I was doing, of how alone I truly was, of how impossible it seemed to raise a child by myself when I could barely take care of myself. But I didn't take Rachel up on her offer. I didn't reach out for help. I just kept preparing in my solitary way. Kept going to work until I was so obviously pregnant that my boss finally pulled me aside and asked about my maternity leave plans. I'd been so focused on hiding my pregnancy that I'd forgotten I'd need to take time off work, that I'd need to have some kind of plan for after the baby was born. The 8th month was a blur of panic and preparation. I finally set up the portable crib in my bedroom. I washed all the tiny clothes I'd accumulated and folded them into drawers. I packed a hospital bag. I took a childbirth class online, alone, watching videos of couples going through breathing exercises together and feeling the absence of a partner like a physical ache. I practiced explaining my situation to people. The father isn't in the picture, I'd say to my reflection in the mirror, trying to make it sound casual, normal, not like the complicated truth it really was. It's just going to be me and my daughter. But even in practice, the words felt wrong, weighted with all the secrets and lies and choices I'd made. My parents called occasionally. My mother worried about me since the divorce, wanted to come visit, wanted me to come see them in Arizona. I made excuses. Work is really busy. I'm fine, really. Maybe for Christmas. Every conversation was a minefield of lies by omission, of carefully avoiding any mention of the baby growing inside me, of the granddaughter they didn't know was coming. The guilt ate at me, but not enough to make me tell the truth. I was too far into my deception now, too committed to my decision to do this alone. Daniel tried to contact me once, about a month before my due date. A text message that came out of nowhere. Hey, I hope you're doing okay. I know things ended badly between us. I'm sorry for my part in that. I stared at that message for a long time, my hand unconsciously resting on my swollen belly, feeling my daughter kick against my palm. Part of me wanted to text back, to tell him everything, to give him the chance to know his child. But the anger won. The hurt won. I deleted the message and blocked his number. I went into labor on a Tuesday night in late November. I was at home, watching television and eating ice cream straight from the container when I felt the first contraction. At first, I thought it was just Bragg's contractions, the false labor pains I'd been experiencing for weeks. But they kept coming, regular and increasingly painful, and by midnight I knew this was real. I drove myself to the hospital. Can you imagine that? 9 months pregnant, in active labor, gripping the steering wheel through contractions, completely alone. I should have called Rachel. I should have called someone, anyone, but I didn't. I just drove through the empty streets, breathing through the pain, terrified and stubborn and foolishly determined to prove I could do this by myself. The hospital staff was amazing, but I could see the concern in their eyes when I checked in alone, when they asked about the baby's father, and I said he wasn't involved, when they asked if there was anyone they could call for me, and I said no. The nurse who admitted me, her name was Patricia, held my hand during a particularly bad contraction and said gently, "Honey, labor is hard. You don't have to do this alone." But I did. I had to. Because admitting I needed help, calling someone, breaking my silence, it would have meant admitting I'd been wrong, and I wasn't ready to do that. So I labored alone through the night, breathing and pushing and crying and cursing, with only the nurses and a doctor I'd never met before to witness the birth of my daughter. She was born at 6:47 a.m. on November 15th, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 20 inches long, with a full head of dark hair and Daniel's eyes. The moment they placed her on my chest, still wet and crying and perfect, everything changed. All the anger, all the hurt, all the stubborn pride that had carried me through 9 months of secret pregnancy, it all melted away in the face of this tiny human being who was entirely dependent on me. "What's her name?" Patricia asked, preparing the birth certificate paperwork. I'd thought about names throughout my pregnancy, but had never settled on one, as if not naming her would keep her somehow theoretical, not quite real. But looking at her now, feeling her tiny hand curl around my finger, I knew exactly what her name should be. Hope, I whispered. Her name is Hope. Because that's what she was. That's what she had to be. Hope that I could do this. Hope that my choices hadn't irreparably damaged her future. Hope that love could be enough, even when everything else was broken. They kept us in the hospital for 2 days. Those were strange, surreal days of learning to breastfeed, learning to change diapers, learning to function on no sleep while nurses checked on us and offered advice. I had no visitors, no flowers or balloons or cards, just me and Hope in our little hospital room, starting our life together in the same isolation I'd created for us months earlier. When they discharged us, a nurse wheeled me out to my car with Hope in her car seat. I'd practiced installing it a dozen times at home, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely buckle her in. The nurse must have sensed my panic because she knelt down beside me and said, "You're going to be a great mom. Trust yourself." But I didn't trust myself. How could I? Every decision I'd made over the past 9 months had been driven by pain and anger and pride. I'd kept Hope a secret from everyone who should have known about her. Her father, her grandparents, my friends. I'd robbed them of the chance to love her, to support us, to be part of her life from the beginning. And for what? To protect my pride? To punish Daniel? To maintain control over a situation that had already spun completely out of my control? I drove home from the hospital at 15 miles per hour, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds to make sure Hope was okay. Every car that passed felt like a threat. Every red light felt like an eternity. When we finally made it back to my apartment, I sat in the parking lot for a long time, just staring at her sleeping in her car seat, wondering what the hell I'd done, how I was going to do this, how I was going to raise this perfect child when I felt so utterly broken myself. The first few weeks with Hope were the hardest thing I'd ever experienced. People talk about the newborn stage being difficult, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of caring for an infant completely alone. She cried constantly, from hunger, from gas, from tiredness, from who knows what. I barely slept. I barely ate. I lived in a fog of exhaustion and anxiety, constantly worried I was doing something wrong, that I was failing her, that she deserved better than me. I'd gone back to work after just 4 weeks because I couldn't afford any more unpaid leave. I'd found a daycare that could take Hope, but leaving her there that first day nearly broke me. She was so small, so vulnerable, and I was abandoning her with strangers so I could go clean people's teeth and pretend everything was fine. The guilt was crushing. Work knew I'd had a baby, obviously. I'd had to explain my maternity leave. But no one knew the full story. They didn't know about the divorce, about the affair, about my decision to keep Hope a secret from her father. They just knew I was a single mom struggling to make it work, and they were sympathetic, but not overly curious. I was grateful for their polite distance. Rachel, my neighbor, became my lifeline even though I fought against her kindness at every turn. She'd knock on my door when she heard Hope crying at 2 a.m. and offer to take her for an hour so I could sleep. She'd bring over casseroles and baby clothes her kids had outgrown. She never asked questions about Hope's father or why I was doing this alone. She just helped, quietly and consistently, asking nothing in return. One night, when Hope was about 2 months old and I was at my absolute breaking point, so tired I couldn't see straight, so overwhelmed I wanted to run away from my own life, Rachel found me sitting in the hallway outside my apartment, crying while Hope screamed inside. "I can't do this," I told her through my tears. "I thought I could, but I can't. I'm a terrible mother. She deserves better than me." Rachel sat down beside me on the dirty hallway carpet and put her arm around my shoulders. "You're not a terrible mother," she said firmly. "You're an exhausted mother. There's a difference. And you can do this, but you can't do it completely alone. Let people help you, Sarah. Let me help you." "Why?" I asked, genuinely confused by her persistent kindness. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." "Because I was you once," she said quietly. "My oldest son's father left when I was pregnant. I tried to do it all alone too, out of pride and hurt and stubbornness, and I nearly destroyed myself in the process. So when I see you struggling the way I struggled, I want to give you what someone finally gave me, the permission to need help and the support to accept it." That night was a turning point. I let Rachel take Hope for a few hours so I could sleep. And when I woke up, feeling slightly more human, slightly more capable, I started to understand that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was survival. But even as I slowly learned to accept Rachel's support, even as I started to build some semblance of a stable routine with Hope, the secret I was keeping ate away at me. Every time Hope smiled, I thought about how Daniel would never see it. Every milestone, her first laugh, her first time rolling over, her first solid food, was tainted by the knowledge that her father didn't know she existed. My parents called to wish me Merry Christmas, and I lied to them again. "I'm good, Mom. Work is busy, but good. I'll try to visit in the spring." In the background, Hope started crying, and I had to muffle the phone against my chest until she stopped. The guilt of lying to my mother, of keeping her granddaughter a secret from her, made me physically sick. And then there were the practical concerns that I'd foolishly ignored. Hope had no legal father on her birth certificate because I'd left that line blank. She had no medical history from Daniel's side of the family. She had no financial support beyond what I could provide on my dental hygienist's salary. I'd made decisions in anger and pain that had real, lasting consequences for my daughter's future, and I was starting to understand just how deeply I'd screwed up. Hope was 4 months old when I finally hit my breaking point. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I'd taken her to the park near our apartment. I was pushing her in a swing, watching her squeal with delight when I saw them, Daniel and Jessica. They were walking hand in hand, laughing about something, looking happy and carefree and utterly oblivious to the fact that Daniel's daughter was 20 feet away from him. Jessica was pregnant, very obviously pregnant, maybe 6 or 7 months along, and Daniel had his hand on her belly, the same way he used to put his hand on mine when we'd talked about having a baby together. They were building the family that should have been ours, and he had no idea that the family he'd actually created was right there in front of him. I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, watching them walk past without seeing us, without knowing that everything they thought they knew about their life was incomplete, that there was this huge piece of truth they were missing. Hope cooed from the swing, and the sound broke my paralysis. I grabbed her carrier and practically ran back to my apartment, my heart pounding, my hands shaking, tears streaming down my face. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep carrying this secret. It wasn't fair to Hope, it wasn't fair to Daniel, and it wasn't fair to me. The anger and hurt that had driven my choices was still there, burning in my chest like a hot coal, but I had to be bigger than that now. I had to be better than that, for Hope's sake. But making the decision to tell the truth and actually doing it are two very different things. I spent weeks agonizing over how to do it. What to say, when to say it. Do I call him, text him, show up at the house that used to be mine with our daughter? Every option seemed impossible, fraught with potential disaster. In the end, I sent him an email. Cowardly, maybe, but it was all I could manage. I wrote it at 3 a.m. while feeding Hope, my laptop balanced on the arm of my chair, tears dripping onto the keyboard as I typed. Daniel, there's something I need to tell you, and there's no easy way to say it. I had a baby, our baby. Her name is Hope, and she's 4 months old. I know this is a shock. I know you have a lot of questions. I kept this from you out of anger and hurt, and I was wrong to do that. Hope deserves to know her father, and you deserve to know your daughter. If you want to meet her, I'll make that happen. If you don't, I'll understand. And I won't ask anything of you. But you needed to know she exists. Sarah. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it, and then I sat there in the dark, holding Hope while she slept, wondering what I'd just set in motion, terrified of the consequences but knowing I'd finally done the right thing. Daniel called 2 hours later. It was barely 6 in the morning, and his voice was hoarse, like he'd been crying or hadn't slept. "Is this real?" he asked. "Do I really have a daughter?" "Yes," I said simply. "You do." "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep this from me?" His voice was equal parts anger and anguish, and this is where I had to be honest, brutally honest, about my own mistakes. Because I was angry, because I was hurt, because when you told me you wanted a divorce, I felt like you were throwing away everything we'd built together, and I didn't want to give you the chance to be part of this one good thing that came from our marriage. I was wrong, Daniel. I know I was wrong, and I'm sorry. There was a long silence. Then, "I want to meet her. Today. Can I come today?" "Yes," I said. "You can come today." He arrived at my apartment at 10 that morning. I'd spent the intervening hours making myself and Hope as presentable as possible, though I'm not sure why I cared what I looked like. Maybe some part of me still wanted his approval, still wanted him to see that I was managing okay, that I hadn't completely fallen apart. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, looking older and more tired than I remembered, everything I'd planned to say evaporated. "She's sleeping," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "But you can see her." I led him to my bedroom where Hope was napping in her portable crib. Daniel stood over her for a long time, just staring, his hand over his mouth, and then he started crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Sarah, she's perfect, and I missed everything. Her birth, her first months, everything." "I know," I said quietly, "and that's my fault. I robbed you of that, and I'm sorry." We talked for hours that day. Once Hope woke up and I let Daniel hold her for the first time. He was awkward at first, nervous about supporting her head correctly, terrified he was going to break her. But then she looked up at him with those eyes that matched his, and something shifted in his expression. Love, instant and absolute. The kind that changes you fundamentally. "Jessica and I are having a baby," he told me at one point, and I nodded because I already knew. But this, Hope, she should have been first. She should have been mine and yours together when we were still us. I destroyed that. I destroyed everything we had. "We both made mistakes," I said, because it was true. His cheating, my secrets. We'd both handled our marriage's collapse in the worst possible ways. Over the following weeks, Daniel and I worked out a custody arrangement. He was angry about what I'd kept from him, and he had every right to be. His lawyer talked about suing for full custody, claiming I'd demonstrated I was an unfit mother by keeping Hope a secret. But Daniel didn't want to fight. He just wanted to be Hope's father, to make up for the months he'd lost. We settled on shared custody. Hope would spend weekdays with me and weekends with Daniel and Jessica. It wasn't ideal, but it was fair, and more importantly, it was what Hope deserved. A chance to know both her parents, despite the mess we'd made of everything. Telling my parents was harder than telling Daniel. I called them on a Sunday afternoon, when I knew they'd both be home, and I just said it straight. "Mom, Dad, I have something to tell you. I had a baby. Her name is Hope, and she's 6 months old. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then my mother's voice, small and hurt. 6 months? You've had a baby for 6 months and you didn't tell us? I explained everything, the divorce, the affair, the pregnancy, my decision to keep it secret, everything. My mother cried. My father didn't say much, but I could hear the disappointment in his breathing. They felt betrayed, excluded from one of the most important events in their daughter's life, and I couldn't blame them. I'd robbed them of their first grandchild's birth, of her first 6 months, of the chance to support me when I needed it most. We're coming to visit, my mother said firmly, next week. We need to meet our granddaughter. They came, and they fell in love with Hope instantly, the way grandparents do. But the hurt lingered in my mother's eyes every time she looked at me. You went through all of that alone, she kept saying, shaking her head. Pregnancy, birth, those first terrible months, all alone. Why, Sarah? Why would you do that to yourself? Because I was angry and scared and making bad decisions, I told her honestly. Because I thought I could control everything by keeping secrets, but all I did was hurt everyone, including myself. My relationship with Daniel slowly evolved into something functional, if not friendly. He was a good father to Hope, present, loving, committed. Jessica was cautious around me at first, which I understood. I was the ex-wife who'd kept a huge secret, who'd essentially ambushed them with a child they didn't know existed. But she was kind to Hope, and that's what mattered. Their son, Daniel's son with Jessica, was born 3 months after I finally told Daniel about Hope. A boy named Matthew, Hope's half-brother. The family that should have been mine, that I'd pictured in my head during all those years of marriage to Daniel, existed now, just without me in it. That hurt in a way I hadn't anticipated. A grief for the life I'd thought I'd have. But here's the thing I learned, slowly and painfully. Anger and pain are not foundations on which to build a life. They're not good reasons to make major decisions. They're not justifications for keeping secrets that affect other people. For 9 months, I let my hurt dictate my choices, and those choices had consequences. For Hope, for Daniel, for my parents, for everyone. Hope is 18 months old now. She's walking, babbling in what sounds like her own language, developing a personality that's all her own, stubborn like me, charming like Daniel, fearless in ways that terrify me. She spends weekdays with me and weekends with Daniel and Jessica. She has 2 sets of grandparents who dote on her. She has a baby brother she doesn't quite understand yet but seems to like. She has a life that's messy and complicated but full of people who love her. And me? I'm learning. Learning to co-parent with my ex-husband. Learning to be civil with the woman he cheated on me with. Learning to accept help from my parents, from Rachel, from anyone who offers. Learning that being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone. That asking for help isn't weakness. That secrets kept in anger only breed more pain. I still feel the anger sometimes. When I see Daniel with Jessica, with their son, with the family they've built together, there's still a sharp pang of loss, of what might have been. When I lie awake at night in my small apartment, listening to Hope breathe through the baby monitor, I still think about how different everything could have been if Daniel had been faithful, if I'd been braver, if we'd both made better choices. But more than the anger, I feel gratitude. Gratitude for Hope, who saved me in ways I didn't know I needed saving. Gratitude for Rachel, who showed me that kindness from strangers can be life-saving. Gratitude for my parents, who forgave me even though I didn't deserve their forgiveness. Gratitude for the painful lessons I learned about pride and control and the dangers of making decisions from a place of hurt. If something feels wrong in your relationship, trust that instinct. If you're in pain, don't make major life decisions until you've had time to process that pain. If you're keeping secrets that affect other people, ask yourself why, really ask yourself why, and whether those reasons are good enough to justify the damage those secrets will cause. I kept hope a secret because I was angry at Daniel, because I wanted to punish him, because I wanted to maintain control over something in my life when everything else had spun out of control. But all I did was hurt everyone involved, including myself, including my daughter. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, and when it does, the fallout is always worse than if you'd just been honest from the beginning. Hope deserves better than the choices I made in those first 9 months of her life. She deserves a father who knows her from the beginning, grandparents who were there for her birth, a mother who didn't let pain and anger cloud her judgment. I can't give her that. That time is gone, those moments lost forever. But I can give her a mother who learned from her mistakes, who chose to finally do the right thing even when it was terrifying, who broke the silence before it was too late. And that's not the only secret I discovered that year. Because in the process of going through the divorce, of dividing up our assets and our lives, I found out that Daniel had been planning to leave me long before I discovered his affair. I found emails between him and Jessica dating back almost a year before I walked in on them. I found bank statements showing he'd been moving money into a separate account for months. I found evidence that our entire last year of marriage had been a lie, that he'd been planning his exit while I was faithfully loving him, trusting him, building our future together. That revelation nearly broke me all over again. It wasn't just that he'd cheated, it was that he'd been methodically dismantling our marriage while pretending everything was fine. It was that every smile, every touch, every I love you in those final months had been a calculated lie. It was that I'd been living in a completely false reality, unaware that my marriage was already over. But you know what? Finding out about that earlier deception also validated my instincts. Those small things I'd noticed, those subtle changes I'd dismissed as paranoia, they were real. My gut had been trying to tell me something was wrong long before I had concrete evidence, and I'd ignored it, dismissed it, made excuses for it, because I didn't want to believe the truth. So here's my final lesson, the one I learned at the highest cost. Trust yourself. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Don't let anyone, not your partner, not your friends, not even yourself, convince you that your concerns are invalid or that you're being paranoid. You know your life, your relationships, your reality. And when that reality shifts in ways that feel wrong, pay attention. I ignored my instincts for months. I made excuses for Daniel's behavior, dismissed my own concerns, convinced myself I was overreacting. And by the time I finally acknowledged the truth, so much damage had been done that the only response I could manage was to create more damage by keeping hope a secret. If I'd trusted myself earlier, if I'd confronted Daniel when I first noticed those changes, maybe things would have ended differently. Maybe not better. The cheating, the lies, they would still have happened. But maybe I wouldn't have responded with secrets of my own. Maybe I would have made better choices from a place of strength rather than from a place of shattered trust. If this story touched your heart, if you've seen yourself in my mistakes or my pain or my journey toward making things right, please like this video and subscribe to Voices with Auntie Mimi. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Tell me your story if you have one. Tell me you're not alone. Because knowing I'm not alone in this, knowing that someone out there understands the complexity of human mistakes and the possibility of redemption, it really means the world to me. Because here's the truth, I'm still figuring this out. I'm still learning how to be the mother hope deserves, how to co-parent with someone who hurt me deeply, how to forgive myself for the choices I made. Every day is a new challenge, a new opportunity to do better, to be better. Some days I fail spectacularly. Some days I succeed in small, quiet ways that no one but me notices. But I'm here, I'm trying, and hope is happy and healthy and loved by so many people. That's what matters. Not the mistakes I made, not the pain I caused, not the secrets I kept, but the fact that I finally found the courage to tell the truth, to make things right, to put my daughter's needs above my own anger. If you're keeping a secret right now, if you're making decisions from a place of pain or anger or hurt, I'm begging you, stop. Take a breath. Think about the long-term consequences of your choices. Think about who you're really protecting. Is it yourself? Is it someone else? Or are you just trying to maintain control over a situation that's already beyond your control? And if you're in pain, if someone you love has betrayed you, if your world has shattered the way mine did, I'm telling you that you will survive this. It doesn't feel like it now. It feels like the pain will last forever, like you'll never be whole again, like the only way to protect yourself is to shut down, shut out, build walls so high that no one can ever hurt you again. But that's not living, that's just existing, and we deserve more than that. Find people who can help you carry the weight. Let them in, even when it's terrifying. Tell the truth, even when it's humiliating. Make decisions from a place of what's right rather than from a place of what will hurt least or what will protect your pride. It's harder. God, it's so much harder. But it's the only way forward that doesn't leave a trail of collateral damage behind you. I think about Hope every day, about the life she'll have, about the story she'll tell someday about her mother, who kept her a secret for the first months of her life. I hope she'll understand. I hope she'll forgive me. I hope she'll learn from my mistakes rather than repeat them. I hope she'll be braver than I was, more honest than I was, better at asking for help than I was. And I hope that by sharing this story, by being honest about my failures and my pain and my journey, I can help someone else avoid the mistakes I made. If even one person reads this and decides to trust their instincts, to tell the truth instead of keeping secrets, to make decisions from a place of clarity rather than pain, then maybe all of this wasn't for nothing. Maybe my mistakes can serve a purpose beyond just teaching me painful lessons. Maybe they can help someone else navigate their own darkness with a little more wisdom, a little more courage, a little more hope. Because that's what we all need, isn't it? Hope. The belief that we can survive our mistakes, that we can make things right, that love can grow even in the ruins of what we've destroyed. That's why I named her Hope. Not just because I needed hope to get through those early months, but because I needed the constant reminder that hope exists, that it's possible, that it's worth fighting for even when everything else has fallen apart. So wherever you are right now, whatever you're going through, whatever secrets you're keeping or pain you're carrying, there's hope. There's always hope, even in the darkest moments. Even when you've made mistakes that seem unforgivable, even when you've hurt people you love and destroyed things that mattered, there's still hope for redemption, for healing, for moving forward into something better. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for bearing witness to my pain and my mistakes and my small victories. Thank you for being here, for being part of this community, for believing that stories like mine matter. Please, take care of yourself, trust yourself, and remember, you're not alone. None of us are alone as long as we have the courage to reach out, to tell the truth, to ask for help when we need it. Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Tell me in the comments. Let me know you're out there, that you heard me, that my story reached you somehow. Because that connection, that knowledge that we're all struggling and surviving and trying to do better, that's what makes this bearable. That's what makes this worthwhile. That's what gives me hope